Welcome everybody to another edition of the Cover 2 podcast. I am Nick Nenad and I will be by myself today for this version of the Cover 2 podcast. Unfortunately, Jared and I couldn't do our usual or our annual NFL preview and prediction show that we usually broadcast for like 2.5 hours. We're too busy getting ready for our respective big time events that we're going to be attending this week. That involve NFL teams. And what I mean by that is that Jared Smith will be at Rams and Bills in Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Jared Smith will be attending the first NFL game of the season. I will then be traveling Sunday to the great state of Arizona to go watch my Arizona Cardinals take on the Kansas City Chiefs live and in person. Plenty of videos, plenty of content, live content. I may go after Jackson Mahomes. I may go after Juju Smith-Schuster, and I may even go after Kyler Murray, okay? On this show, okay, I'm going to go over every single division in the NFL. But I'm going to do it in like 5 or less minutes, okay? I'm not going to bore you with your time. So, you know, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun, guys. It's football. It's football, okay? Football's back. I'm excited. Okay, moving on to the AFC West. I just talked about them a lot with the NFC West because, yes, these teams not only play each other, but they play the NFC West, which has 3 very solid teams in it and 2 most likely playoff teams. And when you look at this division, the Chargers, Chiefs, Raiders, and Broncos, they all play each other twice. This is going to be insanity, okay? Again, though, I base this on quarterbacks, but because of how good how great all 4 quarterbacks are in this division, I kind of had to go based off roster. And so this is a little bit different how I base these standings than the rest of the NFL, okay? I start with the most talented roster, and I think that's the Los Angeles Chargers, okay? They're supremely talented. They have the best roster they've had really since they made the playoffs with Philip Rivers a couple years ago. I think unless Justin Herbert gets hurt, this team is going to make the playoffs 100%, and this is definitely a top 2 team in the AFC, okay? They were super close to making the playoffs last year in a very, very tough AFC. You know, I think this is the year that, like, the Chargers curse kind of ends, okay? They're fully integrated in Los Angeles. The Rams did their thing last year. They won at SoFi in the Super Bowl. I think it's the Chargers' time this year, and I think it's the Chargers' year. So I see the Chargers, even with how difficult their schedule is, obviously they play the Chiefs twice. They play the Raiders twice. They play the Broncos twice. I still think they split, go 3-3 in the AFC West. And in the NFC West, I think they can actually beat all of those teams. I don't think they will. But I still do think they'll end up with at least a 2-2 record against the NFC West as well. So you look at that 5-5. I think they probably win the rest of their games realistically. And this team ends up being pretty good. I don't know if they end up having the number 1 seed because, again, the schedule is just too hard for the NFC West and the AFC West to think that these teams are going to be the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. So they likely won't get a bye. But I think they make the playoffs. So I think the Chargers are the most talented. I think they win the AFC West. Then you have to look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They've been the darling in the NFL. They've been one of the best teams the last 3-4 years. But they lose Tyreek Hill. They have a worse offensive line than last year, which still wasn't very good. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. But this team has been trending down ever since they won the Super Bowl. And I just think they're not better than the Chargers. And with how difficult their schedule is, I think this team will not win the AFC West. I think they still do make the playoffs, but I don't think this team really is a Super Bowl contender. I don't think they have enough weapons. I don't think Juju does enough. And, I just think the defense isn't as good either. They lose Tyrann Mathieu, and their defense wasn't good last year, and it gets worse. So, again, this roster got worse. So how am I going to say they're going to be better than the Chargers when their roster got so much better with the additions of Khalil Mack and all that stuff, okay? Going to be tough for them. I still think they're the second best team, though. Third best team, I think, is the Raiders, roster-wise, okay? Questionable offensive line, but the weapons have really improved. If Darren Waller can stay healthy all year, if Hunter Renfrow can do what he did last year, and then they now have Devontae Adams, man, on offense, this team is great. Defense has always been a bit questionable. But again, when you have Josh McDaniels, you kind of can, like, if you can score points right, you can, at least until the playoffs, you can still make the playoffs with a pretty good offensive team. So I think this team, talent-wise, because the defense is lower than the Chargers and the Chiefs, but offensively, they're ahead of the Denver Broncos, who I'll talk about in a second, because of their weapons. I really think Derek Carr is one of the most underrated players in the NFL and definitely one of the most underrated quarterbacks. And I just think with the addition of Devontae Adams, who single-handedly led the Packers with Aaron Rodgers to the playoffs last year, and to, well, they didn't end up winning anything, but, to the number one seed, I think he'll do the same with the Raiders. And again, tough schedule, so they won't end up with a good record, but I see this team being the 5th or 6th seed. Or 6th or 7th seed in the AFC West. Okay, now we go to the Denver Broncos. The Russell Wilson hype train has been real and is real. They signed him to an extension before the season. This guy's here to stay. He's getting paid over $400 million over 7 years. But it's still the Denver Broncos, who weren't very good at all last year, okay? You add Russell Wilson, but there's not much else that was added on this team. The defense is still good. The altitude helps, but I really think, and like my co-host Jared Smith said, I really think the Denver Broncos are a bit overrated this year, and with how difficult the schedule is for the AFC West teams, they'll have to play the Raiders twice, the Chiefs twice, the Chargers twice, and they'll have to play Arizona, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. I do think that this team will have a tough time just even making the playoffs. I know how crazy that sounds. But again, there's 4 divisions in the AFC. Only one team from the AFC West will make it in the top 4 seeds. So then you'd have to have the Chiefs, Raiders, and Broncos all be the wild card teams. So unfortunately, I personally think that if, the Denver Broncos are stacked up against a healthy Chargers, healthy Chiefs, and healthy Raiders, I think they're the 4th best roster. So unfortunately, I think Denver will actually have a tough time making the playoffs. Now, let me say this, though. If the Chiefs and Raiders have injury problems, I do think the Broncos then vault ahead of them. Chiefs, Raiders, Broncos are all close. I think the Chargers are the top team. But still, I think Denver might even be hard to make the playoffs, even with the Russell Wilson addition. It's going to be crazy.